All right, class. This is the first time that we've done a review video. So let's make sure that we set the stage very clearly here. This is what we're looking to do here and what we're looking to accomplish. This video is meant as, quite frankly, the grading rubric for the Unit 1 test. Now, our Unit 1 test has 3 parts: multiple choice, a free response essay, an argumentative essay that you're going to be writing in class, and the short answer. Now, the short answer, so it's a 3-day test. The short answer is this. In fact, I'm going to go over the grading rubric with you. So whether you're taking the test or you're going to retake the test, this is the best place to go to review. Now, I want to be clear about something. This video should not be confused as studying for the test. You're watching a video. I'm reviewing things. Hopefully, you're going through your notes, which you have out in front of you, and you're going from what you learned in class and what you posted as a part of the Schoology assignments that we did together, and that you're putting all this together to study. So this is one facet of it, but it's not it. I have found since I've started making review videos that students think if they just watch this 5 times, that constitutes studying. It really doesn't. So I want to be clear about this. And for the short answer part of the test, it is about half the points on the test. And certainly the argumentative essay is going to be based on what's in this. If you are prepared for the short answer, you'll be prepared for the long essay without a problem. And the multiple choice questions are simply chosen from the subjects of what we cover here. So I just want to be pretty clear and intentional with you as to what we're doing here. So the first question that we went over in class: how did the progressive movement find roots in the middle class, Protestants, realism, and muckraking? And how would each group bring a different asset to the progressive movement? So here's what we essentially went through in class. And for those of you that are categorical learners, we've talked about different learning styles and different learning types. This is right up your alley. So I just made a column for each one. So here's your middle class, here's your Protestants, Protestantism, realism, and muckrakers. And I have written in proper nouns in red, so it's kind of easy to focus in on those. You need those for the long essay when you use evidence to argue a point. Well, let's look at the middle class. Strongest amongst women in the middle class. They have the time to put towards the movement. If you're going to have a volunteer movement, which is essentially what it is, it's best to find volunteers from those that have time. The working poor are not going to have the luxury of time like middle class women will during this time period. It's also going to be urban-based, as most of the middle class and middle class women that can join this movement are going to be located in the cities. And finally, there's also a sense of status here, a sense of that it was expected of you to make use of your time for the greater good, especially it was kind of a middle class Protestant work ethic, as it was sometimes called by Max Weber. Protestantism. Now, I want to make something really clear here. Your book also made this clear, but I want to make sure I put an exclamation point at the end of this. There were other religious organizations fighting for reform. In fact, often side by side with members of other religions. There were Jewish groups, there were Catholic groups, there were groups of all denominations. The reason the Protestants get called out here is it was more organized from church to church, working together, not only within the same city and within the same state, but in some cases across the whole country. Protestants, so for example, Lutherans across the country were working together on an issue, as opposed to Catholic churches that were often working independently of each other. So that's why the Protestants get called out here. It isn't that others weren't. They were more connected and working together instead of working as individual churches. They're trying to create a heaven on earth, and they're also in almost every city and town. particularly in urban areas. You can start to see these are starting to work together. The idea of realism permeated writing. And you got to keep in mind, people, this is before we had computers and we all had cell phones and we all had stuff that we look at. Here, they're looking at things, but it's not a screen. People were very much into reading. It was the only real entertainment that you had at that time period, mass media entertainment. So realism is based on writing about how things are, to be honest, to be upfront, to be blunt, to grab people's attention. We think of a YouTube video that is, that makes people go, oh my gosh. Well, that's essentially what they're doing in a form of writing. It was found particularly in art as well as in writing. And you had magazines that were based on this idea of telling people the way it really was and not hiding anything. And McCullers magazine was a good example of that. And then you had a group of muckrakers, a group of authors who are oftentimes being printed in these realistic magazines, realism-based magazines, and they're trying to inform people into action. They want to make people angry, not just to make them angry, but to make them do something about it. And you got Jacob Riis and How the Other Half Lives, a book he wrote, and he also took photographs like these 3 homeless children in New York City. Sinclair Lewis and Upton Sinclair and The Jungle. Sinclair Lewis will be an author in the 1920s. And Ida Tarbell and Standard Oil, proving to you that you're being ripped off. Our second question that we dealt with was how settlement houses fill a void in American cities. How did women come to dominate the social force? Evaluate the motivations behind their actions. And which motivations do you think sparked the greatest involvement? Well, obviously, I'm not going to go over that last part here. That's up to you to argue. But let's look at the things that the settlement houses were doing and the reasons behind those actions. So they're offering things like nurseries and baby clinics, like those you found in the Hull House, which is located right down here. I have a picture of the Hull House, where you're help for working families, the working poor, and also for mothers. A baby clinic for basic health care, and a nursery to take care of kids while mom is at work. And at this point, that's falling primarily on the mothers. Bank and employment bureaus were often found in these settlement houses, like this one from Minneapolis. The building is still standing. It's now an apartment building. Help for recent immigrants and the poor. Reading groups and classes and lectures. And you would find these in places like the Hull House run by Jane Addams. Help for recent immigrants and the poor, to help Americanize them. Orchestras, plays, and playgrounds will help for children and education for the immigrant children and poverty, children living in poverty who might not otherwise get those access to those things. Social clubs, and these social clubs are sometimes politically based, like the Women's Christian Temperance Union or the Anti-Saloon League. There's a strong prohibition movement. We're going to have prohibition in an upcoming unit. Political action. And you also see people like Florence Kelly, and this is Jane Addams here, and this is Florence Kelly, is arguing against child labor and really using the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the social clubs that are fighting against child labor really are being found in these settlement houses as well. And go back to question 1. The urban middle-class women are at the strong part of this. Another big issue here is women's suffrage, the women's right to vote. So it should not be surprising that lots of women are involved in this movement. We also want to make sure, this question number 3 we did in class. What is socialism? How does it differ from capitalism? How did the socialist movement translate into changes in the cities? Give 2 examples from history, or how we can see it today. Public utilities will be the biggest part of that. And how could these be seen as good and or bad? Well, that's a point of view question, and we did a lot of that in class. So let's just make sure we understand these basic concepts. So if we want to kind of go to the extremes, and I kind of put this on a continuum here, you've got laissez-faire, smallest government possible. We put that at about 2%. And why can we say 2%? 2% taxes. And with 2% taxes, you can fund the basics, border security and a court system. Capitalism. By today's standards, that's about 25%, 20%. There's private ownership with government protections, investments, and laws. So, a highway system in our current way of looking at it. And some, education, K-12 education, public education. You don't have that in a laissez-faire system. So there's more taxes, there's more government involvement, but still 75%, let's say, or 70%, 80%, of what happens is privately operated. Then you have socialism, where you have more government ownership, and now we're up to 50%, for example, or Sweden, which is pushing 65, 70%. Eugene V. Debs is an American arguing for socialism in America. You've got communism, where now you're up to 100%. If laissez-faire is 2, this is 100, and it's total government control of everything. The IWW is a union that was advocating for that very thing. And you get some city socialism. It's not communism, it's not capitalism. And it is when the government owns things that normally had been privately owned. So in Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland, 3 examples you could use. Again, always putting my proper nouns in red. Government control of gas or telephone or the trolley companies. Or in Galveston, where they started the city commission plan. Or in other places, the city manager plan. Real quickly, if you want some examples of public utilities, Metro Transit or Xcel Energy. They're kind of privately owned companies, but they operate through the government. So if Xcel Energy wants to raise their rates, they have to go to the government and ask for permission. So we have kind of one energy company in town to get a monopoly, but they're very much regulated. Metro Transit is much the same way. It's heavily regulated. So it's a little example of some city socialism going on. And you would need to explain the city manager system as part of that question. How did progressives expand democracy at the state and national level? And how was democracy also contracted at the same time? Well, here we've got the 6 changes, and I'm going to go over these pretty quickly. These are kind of collectively known as the Wisconsin idea. Most of these were done first in Wisconsin by such people as Robert L'Enfant. But to go over these 6 things very quickly here, and again, this is meant just to review and give you the rubric for grading, not go through these in great detail. That's what your study guides are for. The direct primary, the people choose the candidates who appear on the ballot, not the political parties. We do that right now. In fact, we do pretty much all of these things. The 17th Amendment, direct election of U.S. senators. We do that now. Senators used to be chosen by the state legislature or the state House of Representatives. The initiative, the referendum, or the recall. We can recall politicians before their terms are over. That was recently tried in Wisconsin, most recently with Scott Walker. It was not successful. It was successful in California about 15, 20 years ago. A referendum or initiative. You can pass laws over the objection of your local government. A secret ballot. That's not the way we used to vote in America, believe it or not. You voted in public, and people could see who you voted for. Now it's by secret ballot. The Bureau of Immigration and Naturalization. And this is an example of actually decreasing some. That's what we asked for. These are good things. I wrote them in green. You do have 2 very bad things that are going on at this point. You did try and limit the ability of recent immigrants to vote. And you also did pass the literacy test in most southern states and a poll tax. And the NCAAP is organizing to fight that. You took a literacy test in class, and I'm willing to bet you've all failed because I don't think I've had a student in 20 plus years pass that literacy test. So the green parts are known as the Wisconsin idea. And the 2 orange parts are mainly being done in southern states to limit voting by African Americans and recent immigrants. Our 5th question is, how did the issue of civil rights take steps forward and backward? And how is the movement planting seeds for future growth and more than making immediate strides? Now, we have a civil rights unit per se, or main part of a unit, in the 1950s, and we think of King and Parks and Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X, and it's not just the 1950s. This idea of civil rights had been brewing, quite frankly, you could argue, from the 1700s. And here's where we see the seeds being planted that will directly bear the fruit of what's coming in the 1950s and 60s. So you get kind of the rallying against poll taxes, the rallying against literacy tests. There is a movement across the United States because of the lynchings that are occurring, which is really nothing more than terrorism to try and stop a group of people from exercising their rights under the Constitution. And the lynchings that were occurring throughout the United States, mainly through such terrorist groups as the KKK, this is causing people to organize across the United States. And we really get our two main civil rights leaders of this era, W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And they're having a big argument. And it's really of a two-step process to get to a third step. What is your first step and what is your second? And I know this can seem so like, why not just do both? Well, there's only 24 hours in a day. You only have time to do one thing first. You can't do both of them at the same time. It's too much of a process. So you got to pick. And as much as this might seem the same, it is very different. So W.E.B. Du Bois is arguing that you need political and social freedom first, economic freedom second, and then you will achieve equality. That you need equality under the law and equality under opportunity before you're going to have the ability to economically make the money you should be able to make without free from discrimination. Booker T. Washington, who is often later called an accommodationist, is more arguing for economic equality first, and he forms Tuskegee University, and you would then use that money equals power, to get your political and social equality. And then you would get to that same third step, equality. Of course, the problem is if you don't have social and political equality first, there's going to be limitations even if you go to college, where you can get a job, how much money you're going to earn, is a bank going to give you a loan or not? And that's going to be the ultimate problem with the Booker T. Washington side of the argument. Although he does form Tuskegee University, and it is going to do great good for the country. All right, I'm going to pause here. We're going to make this a two-parter. I don't want to rush through the last few just to get it in under 20 minutes. So we're going to end here for now, and I will pick up with part 2 momentarily.